Hello, Story Seekers. I'm Ben.
I'm Nico, and you're listening to The Tiny Bookcase.
Our guest for this episode is a short story writer and novelist from Scotland.
His most recent published works include not one, but two short stories in the wonderful sci-fi and fantasy magazine Clark's World. We would like to warmly welcome Dave Goodman.
Hello, Dave.
Hello. Nice to meet you.
It is lovely to meet you. Yeah, obviously, people know that we have a little chat with guests before going on mic, but we really do try and save most of the meeting people until we're being recorded. So it's fantastic to connect with you. I know we connected initially through Twitter because you had listened to the Ian Green episode. Was that right?
Yes, yeah. I met Ian at Chimera, so I followed him on Twitter, and I really enjoyed that episode. So I've been listening for a while, so it's pretty cool to be on the show.
Oh, fantastic!
Nice behaviour, Ben.
What? Sorry, expose my ignorance here. What is Chimera?
Chimera is a book festival and convention in Scotland. It's essentially the kind of science fiction, fantasy, and horror version of the Edinburgh Book Festival that happens. It happens a couple of months earlier in June. Started in 2019. It's kind of the core around which a bunch of fandom is organised in that part of Scotland.
Oh, fantastic. Is it like over a few days? Do you go and sort of book it out, have a good time?
Yeah. It's I think Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It's like 3 or 4 days in June,
nice.
In early June, just at the Pleasance, which is part of the university there. And it's fantastic.
Everything we hear about, especially sci-fi and fantasy conventions, is that it's all about that atmosphere. And I can imagine, because Edinburgh is such a beautiful place anyway, and very, very arty. I bet it's really, really rich with that.
It is, yeah. I think
juice.
I think there's something in the water a bit, and it does rain a lot, so we spend a lot of time indoors writing and thinking about being somewhere else occasionally. So yeah, it's a very fertile environment.
I think we'll have to do some sort of podcast with lots of guests at one of these festivals at some point. I know it's been on the horizon for a while, but yeah, we should definitely do it.
For a jaunt north of the border, Ben.
Well, Chimera has done live podcast recordings at the festival before, so there is precedent.
Fantastic. So the thing that I wanted to open this episode with was asking you what draws you to writing science fiction. What calls to you?
I think it's what I've always read for many years. It's kind of once I sort of grew beyond the Secret Seven and that sort of Enid Blyton-esque stuff. I think the first stuff, I basically went from Secret Seven, Enid Blyton, Swallows and Amazons, that sort of very classic English children's literature. I went from that to straight into sort of Neuromancer and Ian M. Banks, and that was a bit of a shock to the system.
Straight into Neuromancer.
Yeah, it was
a few years there, my friend.
Pretty wild,
fantastic.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think when I read that stuff, and I just kind of hadn't realized you could do that kind of thing in fiction. So I was 10 or 11 years old, and I was sitting there reading this stuff going, goodness me, this is very different, and started writing stuff pretty soon thereafter.
At that age, I hadn't realized half the things I couldn't do with my body, let alone what I couldn't do in sci-fi. Good grief.
That was probably because you were over-focusing on doing one thing with your body, I think.
Yeah. Let's say there were some progressive librarians in the 80s in Edinburgh who would give you an adult borrowing ticket if you were that kind of child who was hanging around at the library quite a lot. And I was definitely one of those.
Well, time for some stories, I reckon. So, Dave, our regular listeners know, but for those that are joining us for the first time, there's going to be 3 stories told in this episode. All of them have been written to the same shared prompt. This week, the prompt is Illumination. And Nico, you're going to be going first.
Illumination. Come in, Brother Humphrey. Humphrey shuffled into the room. He was a natural shuffler. The man moved with the grace of a stick of butter in a velvet bag. He ceased his incessantly awkward movement a few feet in front of the Archdeacon. There was a long moment as he oriented his brain, knees, and bottom in order to facilitate ending up in the right position. He opted, quite spectacularly, for flopping into what we would call a resting at prayer motif. The Archdeacon ran a hand over the coarse lines of his face, pressing at the soft eyeballs under their lids and pulling his chin taut. He had found this to be a measure capable of bringing the illusion of relief when he found himself at the most desperate. He sadly lacked the sort of personality that would allow him to see any irony in this. Humphrey had been, for some time, what he would refer to as a problem. The church would likely call him a simple man. Most folk would have called him a bit of a twonk, but abiding by the principles of loving thy neighbour, especially when thy neighbour sleeps 2 rooms down with all the other monks, the Archdeacon had been forced into the not enviable position of finding something that the brother could do. There were, indeed, a great many things he could probably do as well as any other man. He choked on his own breath now and then, but could manage a knot as well as most infants, and had almost mastered rotating a spoon in a large pot. Modulating the speed and direction did seem to evade him somewhat. The Archdeacon had been surprised to learn, though, a few weeks prior, that Humphrey was able to read and write. It had come as a shock to him, and if he hadn't known better, to Humphrey as well. So, he had tasked Brother Humphrey with the highly sought-after job of transcribing pages of the Lord's own words into nice leather-bound volumes for local lords, ladies, and deep-pocketed friends of the church. Everyone had to have friends, didn't they? And the Archdeacon had to have wine. Next to his half-filled goblet sat a manuscript completed by Humphrey. He'd thumbed through it this morning, wise enough to check the man's work before sending it to sit on some poor soul's plinth. What he'd found had been deeply confusing to him, and in many ways, deeply disturbing. Brother Humphrey, what, may I ask, is this? The Archdeacon unfurled one of his long, slender fingers. The joints in it seemed to bulge in the skin like ripe conkers. He let the tip of it come to rest at the top of the very first page. Bible, said Humphrey, extremely dutifully. Yes. The word escaped the Archdeacon like steam from a long-rusted kettle. I know that, Brother Humphrey. Brother Humphrey wondered why he'd been asked the question if the Archdeacon already knew the answer. Perhaps it was a test. The Archdeacon was a big fan of tests. The Lord sanctioned them, or so he claimed. Humphrey had not, to the best of his extremely limited knowledge, passed any of them at this point. This part here. The Archdeacon drew an invisible circle with his fingertip. He prayed quietly for patience. The presence of Humphrey did not make him feel particularly virtuous. Where I am indicating. What is this? Oh! A single candle illuminated in the cavernous void between Brother Humphrey's ears. Jer. It took much of the Archdeacon's not inconsiderable willpower to not slump forward dead at this. Surely Brother Humphrey was in some way trying to aggravate him, to tempt sin in his heart. Perhaps a few hours on one of the well-made wooden tables downstairs, with a rope around his vegetables and a cruciform up his... No, that needn't be made necessary. And why, brother, is it adorned as such? The Archdeacon had decided that pressing the issue firmly was the only way forward. Because that's the letter that goes at the beginning of Jesus. Humphrey offered it innocently, but a log had been added to the fire under the Archdeacon's cauldron. Listen here, you little... The words caught in his throat. Chalk it up to divine providence, he thought. Not the J, nor the Saviour himself. No. What is all... The Archdeacon searched his vast intellect for a phrase that didn't compromise his status as the man of the cloth. He settled on, this gubbins. Humphrey leant closer, So close, for a moment, the Archdeacon feared the ink would be absorbed into the simpleton's eyes. Then he looked up into his accuser's face. "It's a badger, Archdeacon." The man near wilted. "And what, boy, is it doing perched at the front of the name of the Son of God?" Based on its feet and the trumpet he's playing, I would guess the Lombarda." Guess? You would guess? The deacon resisted the urge to cackle. It had rumbled up him organically. This was not a sensation he'd had before. This fellow was a lunatic. The man was desecrating the name of Christ himself, and several of the later opening title saints, with strange images of cavorting animals, legumes, and at one point, if his squint was reading it correctly, a unicorn that became a little too familiar with itself. "Why, Humphrey, have you done this?" "Why, you ask? Is this what has caused you to take so long in finishing the manuscript? I would expect a brother to have finished half a dozen in the time you've been tasked with." "But I did, Archdeacon." The brother looked hurt by the reproach of his senior. "I even delivered 'em. Lord Chulsby..." The Archdeacon's blood ran cold. Thoughts of rampant ostriches and quinces in papal garb span around his head. These horrid little drawings were already out there, in the world. He could not protect the people from the visions of his depraved lunatic. Those little paint and ink splots were worming their way out into the public. The word of the Lord was supposed to be sacred. Ink on paper, or even better, straight out of his mouth. "Enjoy your Sunday evening. Thanks for coming." He left his tailspin of reverie in time to hear Brother Humphrey say, "Like them a lot, actually. He said he'd like another 30 or so to send as gifts. One even, perhaps, a gift for the king." The Archdeacon's brain ground to a halt, like a water wheel fighting the current to unmake its bread. He spoke aloud. "And of course, we must charge extra with your lovely drawings in him. The king will want very large pictures as well. Something with a lion, or some kind of exotic fruit. With breasts. Yes, I am led to believe the king likes breasts." He looked into the deeply confused face of Brother Humphrey and licked his lips, amphibian in his desire to breathe both air and expensive wine. "Well, don't just stand there, man. Get out there and draw me some flipping pictures."
That tickled me greatly.
I am
Very
glad
good
to
stuff.
hear it.
Yeah.
I feel like that is absolutely got to be a genuine origin story. That must have happened at some point.
I think it might be Nico's origin story, actually.
This is true.
I
That's my
connected.
university experience.
Yeah, I connected quite a lot with, because Nico does obviously a lot of the art for the channel, but also he has his own Twitch channel where he does sort of like live drawings, and he does commissions and all sorts.
Cool.
But he has been doodling extremely explicit and funny things since the first day that I've met him. So I strongly connect that kind of artistic expression with Nico. So that was lovely.
We do say there's a little bit of us in all of our characters, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes.
I do remember actually quite clearly that the first time we ever hung out properly in a pub, I drew Toad of Toad Hall with an enormous set of genitalia sort of pressed against the windshield of his motor car, didn't I?
Yeah, it was like a swollen, warty member. Yeah, it was. It haunts me still. Yeah. No, I think you actually drew the entire cast of The Wind and the Willows, all doing terrible things to each other with their equipment.
I guess if you were going to stay friends after that, then it's obviously a strong friendship.
Yes.
He just likes moles.
Yes, I do. And enormous genitalia, apparently. No, it was lovely. It had your normal hallmark of intricate similes, which
Yes.
even though you basically do it every time, always surprise me, and you always get a laugh out of me, or it's done for a different effect. You can repurpose that tool to drama, horror, whatever. And it's good to see that still flowing strong for you. So nice work.
Thank you. It's nice to write a comedy. I haven't really written something like this for a little bit, so it was quite nice to just sort of like relax in the writing of it.
Bust a comedic nut. Sorry,
Yeah.
You've got me. You got my mind in the gutter, man. I need to get out. Before I do though, rope around his vegetables was very funny. I like that.
I'm glad.
I'm glad you didn't take it as far as I thought you were going to, though, with the cruciforms.
Ooh. Cheeky.
That's for one's imagination.
Yes.
And the Patreon.
Twonk. What, like, obviously I've heard it before, but like, what do you think it means?
Which words? I didn't catch what you said.
Twonk.
Twonk. I sort of just a bit of a dickhead, really.
Would you say
Idiot.
it's like a step down from a twat?
Yeah, I think it's like it's more child friendly than a twat, isn't it? But it's
I ask because I have no idea. Like I have used it before and I actually don't know, which is potentially a bad thing.
Is it the middle ground between a twit and a twat? I think it might be.
A twit.
it might be.
Where does the honk?
Twat.
Where does the honk? Where the onk come from?
Twit and a
Plonker?
donk. I don't know.
Right. Okay.
Maybe
I have.
a twit and a
I
twat
have-
and a
I-
plonk.
Yeah, I have googled it now. Okay, so it's actually
no.
it's 3 words. It's twit, twat, and plonker all in one.
There you go.
So it is it was a powerful word used very well. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot. Especially when it became obvious that he was a twonk when you said his first word, which was Bible.
Yeah, I got an instant sense of the character there. I thought that was very effective.
It's wonderful. Gubbins,
Yeah, I
I
think
thought was potentially a poor word choice. Actually, that's my only note. I think.
Okay.
Because the Archdeacon seems like he's extremely refined and well put together, and Gubbins is such it's sort of the antithesis of what he'd been presenting himself as up until that point.
He might say something like ephemera.
Yes, something like that.
I think if I were to reframe it slightly, it would be that he was searching for a word that Brother Humphrey would understand,
Good
as
point.
opposed to a suitable word. But I haven't said that very well here. I completely agree with you.
Okay, well that's a very minor tweak in what otherwise is a very amusing and fun story. So I like that a lot. I also wrote down quinces in papal garb because sometimes when you write something, you just or even when you hear it, you know that no one's ever said that before. And that was one of those times. Yeah, that's a brand new sentence, my friend.
I think they send you trophies for that now, don't they?
Potentially.
I can't move for the fucking things.
I'm pretty sure there's a whole subreddit dedicated to collecting them, so you can probably pop that in there.
Wow.
That does sound like a good idea. Anyway, enough of Nico's very fine story. Shall we move on to yours? Yeah, let's hear what you've got, Dave.
Okay, so this is it's about 1,800 words, so I will read a reasonable clip, but we'll see how we do.
Feel free to take your time. No need to push it. We've both gone short. So.
As I think you'll find it's a fairly fast moving story anyway, but
Wonderful.
See how we do. Illumination. The ship wakes me up because something is moving on the crew decks. I don't get down there for nearly 2 days. I'm off my work cycle, so it takes me a while to recover from deep drift, especially coughing up tank slime on my own. As soon as I'm suited and harnessed, I hit another problem. The deck hatch hisses open to total darkness. Sojourner, turn on the deck 4 lighting. I'm going to need to see this thing to catch it. My maintenance tongs clink lightly against my harness as I peer into the shadows. The voice is soft in my ear. I'm afraid I can't do that, Lem. Why the hell not? Long-term power saving is in effect. Your user account is not permitted access to ship core functions outside designated work periods. I rub my forehead. Let me get this straight. You woke me up to find something moving down here, but I can't turn on the lights. A moment of silence. It would appear this eventuality was not anticipated. Great. It's my job to pop out of deep drift once a decade, fix what needs to be fixed. I'll get there 25 years older than anybody else on board. My transit bonus is what I get in return for a quarter of my life. If I wake up Mattinson to flip a light switch for me, he'll chop 20% off minimum. Fine. God damn it. I'll use my headlamp. I follow the main crew accessway, a hexagonal corridor lined with off-white panelling, maintenance hatches, open doors into each compartment. We were hot bunking in here for the first 6 months of the trip, until the crew and their families joined the rest of the drifters. I check each one as I pass. Nothing. A few photo prints tacked to bunk walls, an empty coffee cup held in place by the ship's slow spin. The light from my headlamp reflects from scratched locker doors, a tiny shaving mirror screwed to the bulkhead, a flash of colour from a ripped poster. I'm trying to picture what the hell this thing is. Big enough to trigger the movement sensors, at least. I'm wondering if the stupid tongs I brought are going to be enough. They're for pulling fungus out of vents, not trapping animals. Oh shit. I just had a thought. A bad thought. I tap my wrist. What was our last automated water stop? Last water stop was Cerex 9, 27 standard years ago. We replenished all ship water supplies to 98% capacity. I lean against the corridor wall. Why not 100%? Unanticipated biomass was included with the water payload. I squat down on the deck, the strength going from my legs. Ship, are you telling me we've got a Syruxian bristleworm on board? The ship sounds faintly aggrieved when it answers. Unclear. Sensors and water intakes are limited in function. Great. Just fucking great. Those things grow to 5 meters. The Syruxians engineered them to survive out of water, unlike their Terran ancestors. They bred them to control the numbers of the local fish analogue eating their algae beds. Then some bright spark thought they could do the same for the rabbits someone let loose a couple of years after the planet was settled. People don't go swimming anymore on Cerex. Or go outside the colony fence line, if we're being honest. Syruxians are idiots. Any movement since the last ping? I ask, sweeping my headlamp across the next compartment. Affirmative. There is movement 3 compartments from your current location. Fucking AIs. Never tell you anything unless you ask the right question. I remember the name the Terrans gave this thing's ancestor. Bobbit worms. Mouthparts like scissors. On this thing, they'll be more like shears from the hydroponic deck. I creep forward. 1 bulkhead. 2. Range, I whisper to the ship. 5 meters, it says softly in my ear. Wish me luck. Good luck, Lem, it replies instantly. Say what you like about Descartes-class ship AIs, they sure can execute on a clear instruction. I shake my head and turn the corner, tongs held out in front of me. At first, I see nothing. There's a double bunk on either side, lockers lining the far wall. It's narrow. Some kid's crayon picture askew on one of the lockers from before they went into drift. They'll be down there now, aging a year for every 100 we're out here. Focus, Lem. The bunks are all made up tight, no sheepfolds or pillows to hide behind. God damn it, I know where it is. It's under one of the beds. I step back, then squat down and sweep with my headlamp. It's under the left bunk, easily 3 or 4 meters. Hard to tell when it's coiled up like that. As big around as my arm. Out of the water it's a dull, damp brown, although the beam of light makes its carapace sparkle with iridescence. A million tiny legs ripple along its sides. Its head moves. This thing can sense my heat. The one thing I do remember is these suckers are fast. The worm darts out from under the bunk, uncoiling so rapidly it's like an anchor rope running out. I duck and it goes past me, hitting the wall with a wet slap. I grab it with the tongs in my right hand. The thing thrashes, whipping its mouthparts at me, segmented body writhing. I try to pin it, but it twists, snapping at my gloved fingers. Then, with a sudden crack, it drops to the deck. It's broken in half right along one of its segments. The lower half scuttles away into the corridor, while the upper half darts past me and drops off the bunk, leaving a damp smear on the blanket. Great, I say softly. Now there's 2. I track it as far as the drift decks before I lose my patience with Sojourner. I need access to the illumination controls right now. My life is at risk. No immediate risk detected. Please clarify. I rub my face. Lethal biohazard present on the ship. Energy-saving protocols in effect. Access denied. Fuck. I look down at the deck and the slime trail is gone. The drifter decks are stacked 100 deep, drift pods mounted on scaffolds with gridded walkways suspended between them. Above and below, the pods recede into darkness. Only the wavering beam of my headlamp and the soft glow of each pod control panel gives a sense of scale. Can you tell me where it's gone? That's why you woke me up, right? The ship goes silent for a moment. It seems to do that when it's trying to reconcile conflicting instructions. 2 movement signatures are present in lower deck 9. They are moving in the same direction. I try to picture the ship's layout through my post-drift fuzziness. Is that the algae tank level? Correct. Algae and protein generation tanks are contained on lower deck 9. My gut twists. If that thing gets into the fish tanks, well, best case is everyone gets to our destination a lot skinnier. Worst case, we all die. The tanks are automated, generations of Terran tilapia schooling in simulated day and night, eating shredded algae dropped in by the feeders, getting zapped and mashed and turned into the protein slurry that keeps everyone alive. But a fucking bobbit worm, well, it can eat a lot of fish. I know something's wrong the moment I get down there. The fish tanks are sealed, but the grow tanks are open, so the automated arms can turn the algae and extract it for processing. They aren't moving though. It's a night cycle. Grow lights turned off. Tracking update, please? No data available, says the ship. Why not? I ask, still clutching the stupid, useless tongs. No sensors on the tank deck due to the regular movement of the automated algae systems. I cannot monitor past the doorway you are standing in. I take a deep breath, sensing opportunity. Sojourner, please reconcile conflicting instructions. You can't provide me with sensor data to track biohazard, but I need to see where it is. Can we light this deck alone as an escalation measure? I'm spinning half-remembered queries and prompts from the part of tech training I hated most. I didn't get into this business to negotiate with jumped-up flowcharts like the ship AI. I like to make things, fix things, use my hands. The ship is quiet for a good minute. I time it, staring into the dark. Illumination control granted for lower deck 9 only due to lack of alternate tracking data. I sag against the wall with relief. Turn on all illumination in lower deck 9. Floods, tank lights, everything. Another moment of silence. Confirmed. Illuminating. Right after I turn the lights on, I wish with everything I've got that I hadn't. There's got to be 1,000 of them. There's so many in the algae tank, I'm pretty sure I could walk across their backs. They're sliding over each other, segmented bodies shining in the bluish light of the grow lamps. I swear I can hear them chittering, mouthparts snapping at the sudden brightness. I stand there with my mouth open, tongs dangling uselessly by my side. When the light hits them, it's like they start to boil, thrashing in the water, twisting and rolling. A few begin to slip over the sides of the tank, dropping to the deck with wet thuds. They raise their broad, flat heads, sensing my heat, the opportunity for fresh protein. I let out a strangled half scream, horror and fear and anger rolled into one. Then I step back and hard seal the whole tank deck. Sojourner, I need permissions to revive the command crew right now. Silence. I allow myself a brief moment of hope. In-flight permissions changes are reserved to command crew authority. I grunt in frustration. Think, Lem. I'm not dying on this bucket. I've got a crowbar and a welding rig in my tool store. I can crack the drift pods. It sucks being woken up with a hard system flush. Mattinson is going to be raging. But if we don't salvage these tanks, we're all dead anyway, and I can't do this on my own. We're going to have to comb this ship, deck by deck, rivet by rivet, burn them out. Even then I'll be waking up every 5 years to check they haven't come back. I'm going to get to Proxys 4 in my 80s, not my 60s. I get back to the command deck and unseal my tool room, find my crowbar. It's got a nice weight in the hand. I've had it for years and it's scarred with use. I cracked a lot of hull plates with this thing in the salvage yards. A good tool. Reliable. It got me this chance, this job, my retirement on Proxys 4. Now, it's going to help me keep it.
I got completely lost in that story, my friend. That was so good. That was
Cool.
so good.
Glad you liked it.
Yeah, the world building was phenomenal. You did it all so quickly, and just everything felt like
Yeah.
it was not only functional but also like elegant and well put together. It was really good.
Is it a world you've written in before, or one you created entirely from spec for this story?
So I've definitely written several stories set in a similar universe. One of which is one of my stories in Clark's World. This is potentially part of that same universe. It's a kind of mid to distant future, sort of 200-300 years in the future from now. So there's a bunch of world building ingredients swirling around in my head that I can kind of call on for this kind of thing. But yeah, it was pretty much from whole cloth. Otherwise, apart from that sort of general universe that I have floating about in the back of my head.
So I only ask because I want more of it. So where can me and the other listeners go and read more of that? So in Clark's World, what issue would that be?
So the story I'm thinking of is in the December 2021 issue, which is called Vegvisir, and that's set on Mars. And it's a similar sort of man in peril story, but with a very different cause of that peril and very different ending. But it's interesting because most of the short stories I write are longer. I tend to write sort of 5, 6, 7, 8 to 10,000 words. Basically like a tenth of a novel. So I've normally got a lot more space to do that kind of detailed world building that I really enjoy doing. So it was actually quite a challenge writing this I think the first draft was like 2,200, 2,300 words. So I was chopping stuff left and right. And then I found some sort of swifter ways to get the same idea across. And a couple of my critique partners because I wrote this over the last couple of weeks and ran it past which I'll talk about later in the interview, the group that I'm part of, that we critique each other's work. And they were like, give us more backstory. So the stuff about Cerex and the rabbits and that was all stuff that wasn't in the first draft that I added as little details.
That was some of the stuff that I felt was a really strong part of the story. Obviously not, it wasn't necessarily the strongest part, but I loved the stuff about the bristleworm and the in particular the line, "People don't go swimming anymore."
Yeah.
That's a great line. It's chill. It's sort of mundane, but it is chilling. The implications are horrible.
Yeah, they are. And the best part about this story is that it's it's actually based on a Reddit thread. So bristleworms or bobbit worms, as they're informally called, are a real thing. They exist. They're not 5 meters long, but they are they are the nemesis of tropical fish tank owners. And there's I think it's the best of forums or best of Reddit subreddit had a thread on it a while ago, which was basically this epic story of this tropical fish tank owner, and we're talking huge, like hundreds of gallons of water with thousands of fish in them, and this guy had been basically fighting this sort of multi-month long battle to find a bristleworm that was in his tank and kept eating his fish. And a friend of mine from my critique group, my friend Leah, sent me a message and was like, "This, but in space." And I was like, that's a prompt. I'm going to tuck that away. And when I saw the Illumination prompt, I went, that would be even worse if the lights were off.
Yeah.
And I was like, there we go, that'll work.
Yeah, it was a really nice play on the monster under the bed scenario. That was because obviously the initial bit where they're sort of searching under the bunks and stuff, it really strong horror vibes to it, whilst just completely immersing the listener, i.e. me in this case, in the science fiction world you were building. It was really, really good.
Cool.
So I caught a couple of references which I'm sure there are more, because normally if you find one or two, there's more than that. So I wanted to quiz you about them. So I'm afraid I can't do that. That's the 2001 Space Odyssey reference, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And my
And
name is Dave, but I didn't give the character that name.
and then the main character is called Lem, which I'm assuming is Stanislaw Lem Solaris.
It is, yeah, yeah. That
Yeah,
was, yeah, that was. I pepper these kinds of things through
I like
stories,
it.
mostly as a lark. But the story that I most recently last July had published in Clark's World is about an AI whose training data includes basically all of human literature, and as a result peppers their speech with literary references. And I dropped more than a few sort of classic sci-fi stories names and characters into that story.
So
Go on, sorry, Nico.
not to play my normal part of saying the then less lit thing, was the great now there are two of them, was that a reference to the Phantom Menace by any chance?
It was not. No, it's been a long time since I've seen that film.
Newt Gunray says it when
Amazing.
Anyway.
Yeah.
No, that wasn't. But I'll take it. I'll pretend that it was absolutely.
Just on the AIs, actually, I thought that was brought to life very well. This fucking AIs, come on, and it felt very real in the sense that he was trying to recall the shit boring training that he had to do on how to deal with these fucking things.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And they wish me luck, and then it replies instantly. It's very dry, but it's very funny. I like that a lot, but it funny in a sort of dark and ominous kind of way.
I
Definitely,
liked that the AI was named after a philosopher.
Yeah, that was me
cool,
flexing my ridiculous English lit degree from 20 years ago.
It's such a fun thing to like name a constructed mind after a great mind. It's
Yes.
almost gross, isn't it?
Yeah. And famously the guy that said I think therefore I am, with the the proviso being that this AI clearly does not think, is clearly following, so it is, as Lem says, a glorified flowchart.
It doesn't think, and unfortunately it is.
There was a thing he did at the beginning that was really good for character construction, which was use the phrase coughing up tank slime. And, if the character had been more scientific, he might have said what it actually is.
Yeah,
and
he might have
did a
called it
really
like
good job of-
oxygenation fluid or something like that. Yeah.
It did a great job of immediately telling me what kind of dude this was.
I think it's
you.
I think another thing that I tend to write about a lot is people doing crap jobs, because the crap jobs will always be with us. I think perhaps the status of those crap jobs might change, not in this universe clearly. Like this guy he's getting some money to essentially throw away a quarter of his life, but maybe how we consider crap jobs will change, and the way we reward crap jobs will change. But there will always be crap jobs. It's just the nature of those jobs will change depending on where we are.
That's essentially the heart and soul of the story, isn't it? That lens through which you're looking at the FTL relativity.
Yeah.
And yeah, he is. He's talking about his retirement and stuff. But when he's talking about that, he's still a young man because he knows that he's spending, as you say, a quarter of his life to do this one job. The cost of it is so high, and he's going around with tongs to pull fungus out of vents. You know what I mean? It's just
and generation ships and like all these ship ideas, they're currently beyond us technologically. But even if we somehow come up with the propulsion that we would need and the armor that we would need to resist the interstellar medium that would shred a ship that was going at any sort of percentage of the speed of light, even if we develop all those things, there's still going to need to be somebody crawling around, like dealing with the mold and stuff like that.
Do you often write in the first person?
Both of my published short stories are first person, and this one is as well. And I think I tend to default to the first person when I want to get across something quite fast moving, or something that is quite visceral in its emotion. But I think all the novels that I've written are all third person close, or some variation thereof. It's a funny one. I have got short stories that I've written that aren't first person, but none of them have been published. So there seems to be something quite about a first person, or maybe about the way that I write first person, which grabs people, and has resulted in a couple of sales.
So I haven't read any of your third person stuff, but I will say that you are extremely good at first person writing. So
Thank you.
It was comfortable doesn't do it justice. That felt like you live in that writing space, and it was very strong. So yeah, just well done. That was my only bit of feedback there. I was just like,
thank you very much.
Just because that felt like a tour de force on how to write a first person sci-fi horror.
Thank you. That's really kind. Thank you.
And I have major qualms about following it.
No, not at all. I'm sure it'll be amazing.
Well, I mean, we say that, but we might have already touched quite strongly on some of the themes of my one. So let's kick into it and see how we go.
Ben's done underwater space millipedes. I knew this day was coming.
Right, here we go. Illumination. More lives of the saints, is it? Well, I'll take them. You got anything else? Something with some blood between the pages, perhaps? But bowels and such, or indeed tales to incite righteous lust in married men. My lordly buyers in London wish to purchase such volumes, and will pay highly for them, those dalliances with the devil. The pedlar smiled at the bishop, as though they were two serfs in an alehouse, and not in a holy place at all. The bishop, however, ached for the contents of the man's heavy coin purse. I can see what might be arranged for your next month. The pedlar took little care to hide his distaste for the bishop's slobbering manner of speech, and soon made his excuses to travel back to London. When the man had left, the bishop unlocked an iron-bound chest he kept hidden in his private rooms, and perused the books it contained. The pink flesh within the erotically illuminated volumes immediately ensorcelled him to commit a sinful act upon himself. When he was spent, the bishop quickly forgave himself with a breathy prayer and left his office to walk purposefully through the monastery. He tucked his chin down into the thick white fur mantle he wore over his soft black cassock, and silently condemned the cold winter winds to hell. The scriptorium was also cold. He could still see his breath clouding in front of him as he leant over the toiling monks to study their work. One monk was scratching out the words, "In the year of our Lord 1302. But the bishop could see the man's hands were unsteady, and so he began to move on. Before he could, however, the monk addressed him directly. I had hoped, your reverence, to speak with you about the firewood rations for the scriptorium. The monk lowered his head, and the bishop felt a surge of panic that he might be asked for more than he was willing to give. Lucifer clings to your back, my son. The bishop's lisp splattered the top of the monk's tonsured head as he bowed it reverentially. I try, with God's grace, to be at odds with the devil at every hour of the day, bishop. And yet you live within walls made to house God. You eat your meals, which are made by other hands, and you sleep atop the straw onto which our Saviour was birthed. Many would consider that to be a beautiful life in the light of our Lord. Slothfulness and gluttony are sins equal to greed and wrath, are they not? Indeed they are, bishop, but my hands become cold in the winter, which slows the work down. I shall not be a merciless man to your wretched flesh. Very well, I will increase the firewood ration for the scriptorium by an extra log. However, it would then be wasteful to end the working day before evening prayers. Don't you agree? I do not. I mean to say that would be an extra 2 hours in dim light. Surely you do not mean to ask for more candles as well? No, my bishop. We will suffer in the name of God for our art, of course. Good. I have seen that your work is particularly fine. There are some volumes in my possession that I would have you copy in the next month. You may work on them in my chambers tomorrow, beginning at dawn. Now, continue with his grace, my son. Over the next month, the bishop had the scribe copy out his precious collection of sinful material. The monk didn't query the content or images in what he copied, merely diligently pursued perfection. So absorbed was the bishop that he allowed his other duties to lapse as he delighted to see the duplication process up close, and insisted on studying the work after the monk had left. The bishop in that month was forced often to forgive himself whilst the other men with the cloth were occupied with evening prayers. As he worked, the scribe monk took painstaking care of his precious reagents and tools. The man had a ready supply of copper sheets which had been treated with vinegar and stored until they were caked in verdigris. He would then scrape off the blue-green dust and would colour it to suit his needs with other pigments. For the play of light upon faces and exposed skin, the monk ground the verdigris up with precious saffron. For the despicable folds of thrusting flesh, he ground it up with cinnabar and tainted it with lead to dye the vermilion it produced back to a soft and vibrant pink. The bishop watched with hunger in his heart as that pink was applied, wishing that he might lower his head to lap at the stained vellum. Atop all those colours, the monk reverentially applied gold leaf until the salacious tails glowed in the winter sun. By the time the work was completed, the bishop had no doubt he would be able to extract a high price from the peddler. The evening before he was due to meet the book-buying peddler, the bishop entered his chambers to find 2 men already within. The scribe monk was stood next to the lectern which held his work, and wore a carefully blank expression. The second man had his back to the bishop, and appeared to be reading the illuminated manuscript. The bishop took a deep breath, with which he intended to unleash God's wrath. Then the second man turned, and he recognised the face of Archbishop Aethelren. He saw that Aethelren had eschewed his cassock of office in favour of travelling clothes, and his face held the thunderclap of a storm the bishop thought he had escaped for good. "One of your monks has brought your activities to my attention." "We've moved you 3 times already, Bishop. This was your last chance, and you knew that. You have forced my hand." 2 more of the bishop's monks marched in to seize him. Their faces were expressionless masks where smiles of deference had once firmly sat. That night the monks prepared a pyre in the courtyard of the monastery. No bells rang to announce the sentencing, and no common folk were informed of the execution. The bishop screamed as the heat rose around him, spittle flying from his lips as he recited every foul thing his monks had ever told him in confession. The men watched him silently, refusing to react to his words. The flames gradually engulfed him, eventually silencing him, and brought cleansing light to the darkness of the monastery.
Good grief.
Crikey.
The
Seems to be a strong anti-monastic sentiment on this podcast, I must say.
listen, we don't fuck with monks around here, man.
Just used to get fucked by them. No, joking. It is a pretty clear takedown of the early 14th century scriptoriums and monasteries. Yeah,
They had it coming.
Yeah,
they did.
If there's anyone needs taking down a peg or two, it's those long dead monks. That's what I say.
I'm gonna forever enjoy this bishop with as someone who's role played with you many times, a voice that you have used before, and I love every time you do it.
So I have entirely lifted this voice from a particular audiobook reader, a man called Stephen Pacey, who reads Joe Abercrombie's books. And he does this excellent voice for a character called Glockter in his Blade Itself books. And mine is a pale imitation of that voice. But thank you anyway.
Well, I bloody love it. But I know it isn't exactly what was happening, but it does feel like he wrote dirty fan fiction, like Bible fan fiction, with smutty drawings. And then he got his... It would be like me doing that and then asking you to type it up and put all the commas in the right places. You know what I mean?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, that was pretty much the vibe. I think he's just, an extremely nasty piece of work who happens to be a pervert.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was literally the first thing that came to mind with the Illumination prompt. So I don't know what that says about me really, but just this idea of these cold monks jerking off over Illuminations just seems to just sort of jumped right into my head.
There's that scene at the beginning with your pervy bishop and the buyer from
Oh, the
London,
peddler. Yes.
and those two characters came to life so quickly. That little moment kind of like zipped me straight into the setting, because
I'm
like
glad that
there are
worked.
different times and different types of monk, but it was like, okay, we're here, this is what we're doing. And I was kind of gutted when the story didn't follow him, because he seemed like a right little lad.
Yeah, we could have had a tale of him peddling his books around London. That could have
And
been
he'd
fun.
could have come back at the oh, cool, blimey, they've only gone and burnt him.
Burn
Look,
him. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the burning has something to do with the sort of culty aspect
yeah.
of these organized religions and stuff. But
I mean, and he was keeping the men cold, wasn't he? So it's all.
he's a bad dude, and he's had problems before, and I don't. The thing that I wanted to convey there was this idea of them just doing it behind closed doors, like just
Yeah.
like nobody can really know that this is what's happened because we just need
You
to
had
get rid
that,
of this idiot.
I think
like
it's
when the
quite,
guy was like, oh, so please go on.
I think it can be quite difficult to write genuinely despicable characters, but still make them kind of relatable. And this character is quite comic, obviously, but also like genuinely pretty dreadful. And it's basically like he's almost kind of Scrooge-like in it. He's got this room full of people working for him that he won't even heat it properly. But he's like Scrooge, but he doesn't learn the lesson, basically.
Absolutely.
And I think you did a really good job of both making him very flawed and human, and also still very dreadful.
Thank you. That's very kind. He's obviously driven by some fairly base urges.
I'd say so. Yeah.
Not just with his sort of sexuality and stuff, but I mean, I also mean with his sort of, he gets that big hit of fear when the guy's about to ask him for some more firewood. It's like, it's firewood, dude. Chill the fuck out.
Well, you just know he's currently managing a call center in Middlesbrough somewhere, like
Yeah, definitely. Yes,
his spiritual successor.
absolutely. This is an ancestor.
Yeah.
Yes.
I would write down the line, Lucifer clings to your back, my son. That was so good.
Yeah, that was actually the first line that I wrote. Just because it felt like it's the sort of panicked response that someone might give when, he immediately jumped into devil imagery to ward off, a simple request. No, just going back to the characters at the start and stuff. We've spoken before about how quickly you have to get off the ground with a short story, and I hope that works. I'm glad that it worked for you, Nico. But that is quite a good. I feel that's quite a good way of getting people into the story straight away, when you have just two very different characters talking to each other, because people can sort of color in the world with the differences, I think. So that was But I had fun. When I found out what you'd written, however, I did sort of panic, because we have often strayed quite close and we've made jokes about writing the same story before. But when you told me you'd done Monks and Illumination, I did panic. But
I think they were two stories in a similar setting, but very different tonally.
Very different.
Happened in that same church.
Yeah, that was the natural end result of the first story. That's where it ends up. You go from just making some nice pictures for the rich folks, and eventually it ends in flaming death.
Burning pornographer monks.
Yeah, I have their first album.
We people who know that you have to mix cardamom and Marmite and a bit of lead to make labia color for your manuscripts, that kind of thing.
Yes, I did. I potentially got a little bit too carried away with the verdigris stuff, but I quite enjoyed this idea.
I really liked it.
The sort of natural color making process was quite fun, I thought.
Human ingenuity.
Indeed. Well, we've had 3 tales. As you say, although they were sort of similar. They were also very different, mine and Nico's. And then you had a very different take on it, which was wonderful to see, Dave. So well done, all, I think.
Thank you.
And probably time to get us on to the interview. Before we do, where can people follow you online and read your work?
The easiest and simplest thing to do is go to my website, which is davidgoodman.net. I am on Twitter as well as Words by Goodman, all one word, obviously, and I'm on Mastodon as Dave Goodman, and that's on the Wandering Shop instance of Mastodon.
Wonderful.
Right.
Well,
You cheeky buggers, you've got a week to read it all and be ready for the interview, because we're going to say loads of stuff that you won't get unless you have.
thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For magnificent beardery, let's cast the Chinicus folliculale spell on Gary Laird. For rich ginger tones on the scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?